Copyright in these lectures is either owned by the ANU or a third party who has licensed the ANU to use it. Students may use the recording for personal study only. No lecture may be communicated online, copied or shared without the prior permission of the ANU.
Okay, welcome back. I'm glad PowerPoint started in 2 minutes today. Okay, so this week we are talking about state capitalism, which is basically about state-owned enterprise. And of course, state-owned enterprise, we've been saying that exists in socialist economies as well as market economies. But so why are there state-owned enterprise? Right? So we discussed this on Tuesday, that of course in socialist economies, state ownership is a norm, right? So therefore, in principle, if it's a pure socialist economy, then the resources will be allocated by rationing. The government decides where the resources, which resources should go where, and how much. So that is using, you can say, rationing, okay? But in market economies, we call this invisible hand, is using, in principle, the market mechanism. So when there is, when the price is higher, right, then people will move the resources to that area or that industry, so that because of the profit motive, right? So so that's the economic way, or you can say that's what you learn in economics. So it's basically the price is determined by demand and supply, and then that equilibrium price will determine where the resources should be allocated. So that's why the government doesn't have to do anything. It's done in the in the market, which means it's done in the private sector. Okay. But as I mentioned, that government still has a role even in the market economy, and this is what we learn in microeconomics, that when there is a market failure, right? So basically the market mechanism doesn't work for certain goods. So one of the examples is like public goods, right? So these are, we call sometimes for externalities, and also, and public goods and externalities. Externality is a case, I didn't mention this on Tuesday, but if you have, like the good example is, let's say you are producing honey, right? Honey. You use bees, right, to produce honey. But of course you can, this is your own bees, and then you produce the honey, right? And then you sell the honey. But the bees can go fly elsewhere, maybe go next door, and then the next door can also, produce honey, right? So that's called externality. So in that case, it's hard to price, right, the honey, because the honey can be produced with your bees, but your bees are flying to the next door, and then the next door neighbor or the next farm might be also selling honey, right? So therefore, the price of honey is not necessarily determined by your bees. Okay? If it's your bee and the bee doesn't go anywhere, then there's a cost of your bees, right? And then you produce the honey, and then you maximize the profit. Right? But if someone is producing honey with your bees, then there will be more supply, right, than what you can produce, right? So therefore, prices might go down because there are more supply, right? If the prices go down, but who's paying for the bees? You're paying for the bees, right? So therefore, your profit will be, will be lower than, and you are the only one producer. So therefore, the price will not reflect, right, what should be, which means that your profit, okay? So that's basically externalities, okay? And public goods is like a park, right? So for one good, a given good, many people can, use it freely, right? So in that case, of course, you can price them, but it's not easy to price them. So therefore, the government usually provides these goods. And also the second example was this natural monopolies. So these are regulated industries, mostly, like utilities, railways, where there's a huge fixed cost. So in that case, it's difficult for private firms to enter. Okay, so that's why even in market economies, there has been, you will see state-owned enterprise. Okay. Oops, sorry. Yeah, sorry, the PowerPoint has frozen, so I will have to do this. Sign out. No, I don't want to sign out. Okay, there's some problem with the computer, so I will have to hard boot. Yeah, this is happening, this has happened multiple times in this lecture theater. Yeah, sorry. So I teach 4 times a week in this lecture theater. Yeah, these things are happening almost every, maybe not every week, but almost every other week, or at least once a week, maybe. Okay, thanks for your patience. Yes, so even in market economies, we do have SOEs, right? So that's what we were talking about. And then we talked about all this privatization that happened, but then what are the reasons for privatization? Well, by selling the SOEs, the government, can receive the revenue, right? So that's one thing. But in many cases, the SOEs are not run very efficiently. So that's why one of the ways to to have the SOEs have them privatized and then exposed to the market forces, which is market discipline, right? And that will improve the efficiency, and and that will improve the corporate governance, which is like wider share ownership. And furthermore, it may introduce competition, okay, in the industry, because if like for example, the way in Japan the railway was privatized was one big SOE, but then it was cut into maybe 4 or 5, right? Divided into 4 or 5, and then they have to compete. Yeah, so that's one of the ways. Okay, so that's why government, is privatized, right? But when we, okay, this is China, this is okay. But when government privatizes the SOEs, what we found was, what these studies have found is that the government doesn't 100% privatize the SOEs. So what happens is the government still owns, right, quite a significant part of the SOE as an owner. Yeah. So that's what's happening. So that's why in so-called share issue privatization, which means that the government sells, right, the shares that it holds, or sometimes they issue new shares, and they do IPOs, initial public offerings. But what happens is that according to the study, like close to 90% of the share issue privatization, the government does not sell the entire SOEs. So that's why governments still have control. Okay? And then, yeah, okay, good. So then, is this still better than 100% owned SOEs? So this is a study done by Nandini Gupta. So she found that yes, that's better. Yeah, it's better than firm that is 100% owned, but at least partially owned. Okay, so that's what we saw on Tuesday. Yeah. So therefore, the question is, then why do governments still want to hold on to SOEs, right? Even partially. So then here comes this idea that in a pure market economy, well, we said the market mechanism determines the resource allocation, right? So that is called invisible hand. And then, but market mechanism may fail. So in that case, the government can help, right? Can intervene. So that you can call it a helping hand, right? And helping hand, in this case, will be visible. But yes, the government, yes, it has other social stability, employment, these social objectives or political objectives. So that then they will, use their visible hand to achieve these social goals or political objectives. But Schleifer and Vishny mentioned that they can be grabbing hand, which means that the government could have their own incentive to, take the resources away from the government, from the SOEs, which means that if in a privatized SOE, then the government can take away the resources from the shareholders. Okay, so that's called grabbing hand. So grabbing hand could be for different motives. It can be like the government officials which want to just take away the resources for their personal use, right? So that's that can be one example. Okay, so as I said, so that could be grabbing hand, but in general, the SOEs do have, have objectives to maintain social stability or employment. But in many countries, there is this industrial policy. We call this industrial policy, so the government does have some plans, right, for the economy. And this is true for many of the Asian countries until more recently. Nowadays, these industrial policies has become much less, but I think countries like China would still have this industrial policy, right? And I think it has become less for like countries like Japan or Korea, but I think Korea still may have. So, so that's why the government does intervene, right? to some extent. Yeah, actually, in Japan, yes, I think there is a listed company. It's like it's building chips, okay, chips for computers. But that is, I think, was a government-owned, yeah. And I think it went into trouble, yeah, at one point. So, so that's one example. So, but the key thing here is that the objective of the government may not be in line with the objective of the shareholders, right? So that's where there might be some conflict of interest. Yeah, and then this is what we talked about. So how does government control partially privatized firms? Well, first you can have majority of the shares, right? And then you can have special voting power, but you can send people, right, from the government directly to the companies. So that's how it's controlled. And this is an example of China that I showed you, right? So you can see that compared to the number of direct board seats held by like a private investors, which is tradable shares, you can see most of them are coming from state legal person, right? So this is one example. You can say this is like, difference between the ownership and control, right? Here in this case, the control is measured by the board seats. Okay, so this was an example of Chinese firms, how they control in Singapore, so I've done this. Okay, so I think this is where we were. So this is an example of privatization, right? Or listing SEOs as a private company. Okay, so this is an example of Harting air conditioning. You have the productive asset, non-productive asset. Non-productive asset includes transportation, medical clinic, and sometimes like schools, all these things. So in this case, the productive asset is listed, right, as a new company, and the non-productive assets is moved to this another company, which is not listed and 100% owned by the government. Right? The listed company, the government owns 59%, and the rest is owned by the public, 41%. Right? So this is where you can say that the market mechanism or market discipline works from this private ownership of 41%. Okay. So this is according to the paper that I'm using here, Den, Gunn, and He. This is they call complete restructuring. Okay. So they say this is a good way to privatize firms, SOEs in China. The next one is not a good way. And they call this incomplete restructuring. So in this case, again, this is a company called Sichuan Chemical Group. Again, you have the productive asset and the non-productive asset, right? The non-productive asset is moved into this company called Sichuan Chemical Group, but this non-productive asset becomes the parent company of the listed company, which is the Sichuan Chemical Company Limited. And the government, right, owns 100% of the Sichuan Chemical Group, and the Sichuan Chemical Group becomes 72% owner of this Sichuan Chemical Company Limited, okay, which is a listed company. So, and then the public owns 28%, okay? So this is how the company was privatized. But according to this paper, it says that since there's this parent company, which is a non-productive asset, like it says, right, medical clinic and kindergarten and retired workers, right? So a company that holds all these non-productive assets becomes the parent. Okay, so if the government directly owns, right, the listed firms like this Harting Air Conditioning, then maybe if the government has any policies, then maybe can direct directly, right? But here it's not very clear because the government only owns this Sichuan Chemical Group, right? So that's why what these authors did was to compare the performance of these two different types of privatization. Okay? And actually they say that why did this happen? Well, they say it's due to political constraints. Approximately 3/4 of the share issue privatization in China went through this incomplete restructuring. So it's only 1/3 that went through the complete restructuring. The other went through this incomplete time. So basically there's a parent subsidiary structure, and the subsidiary is listed, right? And the parent company kept redundant workers and sometimes debt burdens. Okay. So as you can see, right, the non-productive asset or this parent company, Sichuan Chemical Group, is only holding these, non-productive assets, right? So therefore, and they do have to maintain operations of these, but then they're not making money from this, right? So therefore, their debt might also increase, right? So then, what do you do, right? So that's the that's the background or the structure. And let's first look at the performance, okay? No, sorry, this is not important. Let's look at the ownership, okay? This is the whole sample, the first two columns, mean and median. The middle columns, which is incomplete restructuring, right? And then the right columns are complete restructuring. So if you look at the ownership and government variables, which is panel B, and if you look at, let's say, the mean and the median of the ownership of the largest shareholders, the firms that went through incomplete restructuring, the largest shareholders are like 57.2% in the mean, and median is 61%, right? On the other hand, for the complete restructuring, the largest percentage ownership is 43.4%, and the median is 43.7%. So it's obviously smaller, right? And this statistical significance, 3 stars, means that they are the difference is significant. The difference between incomplete and complete, the difference is significant at 1% level. If it's 3 stars, if it's 2 stars, it's 5%, and then if it's 1 star, it's 10%. Okay. So then you look at the chairman holding positions in the controlling shareholders. So what percentage of the firms does the chairman, right, hold, right? Oh, okay, I think this is the chairman that holds the position here. So 86.4% of the firms in incomplete restructuring, the chairman is holding positions in the controlling shareholders. So the chairman is the controlling shareholders for 86.4% of the firms that has been incompletely restructured. But if you look at complete restructuring, this ratio is only 46.4%, right? And next one, CEO holding position in the controlling shareholder, is CEO, right? Is also the controlling shareholder. That's 51% for incomplete restructuring. It's only 15.9% for the complete restructuring, right? So from here, what you can see is that there's more concentration of shares, right, of ownership when the firms are restructured in incomplete restructuring. And also, who's holding this is who's controlling is chairman or the CEO, okay? So, so that's what's happening. And here, it doesn't really tell you where this chairman or CEO came from, right? But there is a good chance that chairman or CEO of this listed company may be coming from this parent company. Okay. Okay. And then breakdown of share classes. The government non-tradable shares is 67.3%. In the mean and median is 6.8%. While for the complete one is 62.6 and 63.6. So it's obviously the government's non-tradable shares is much higher for incomplete restructured firms. And percentage of state shares, again, is 53.3% for the incomplete restructuring and 44.5% for complete restructuring. So again, there's more state shares or for this incomplete restructuring. But for legal person shares, is the opposite. I think the complete restructuring has higher shares. But at least the takeaway from this table is that there seems to be more concentration of shares when the company or the SOE is or SOE goes through incomplete restructuring. Okay. All right. So next, sorry, no, this is not a performance. So, so this is another paper by Fong, Won, and Zhang. So what they do is they look at politically connected CEOs. Okay, so this is when the government sends their officials to the companies where the companies are being privatized. Okay. So this is looking from 1993 to 2001, and you can see that number of firms with politically connected CEOs, and this is the percentage, right? In the last column, you can see about, I don't know, about 1/4, 25%, or even more. Like in 1998, it's like 36% of the companies had politically connected CEOs. Okay. Right. So then the question is, what happens to these companies? So what we're going to see is the performance. Okay. So you can say that we are looking at helping hand or grabbing hand. Okay. So we first look at firm performance. So like return on asset and other performance measures, and we also look at the stock performance, okay, after the IPO of privatized firms. And then we also look at the cost of capital. Okay. So these results are coming from different research papers. So let's look at this one. This is coming from incomplete and complete restructuring. So now I have circled this in red. So this is the 3-year average of share issue privatization, and this is before and after, right? So this is looking at ROA as a performance measure, okay? And then there's a 3-year average before SIP, and then there's a 3-year average after a SIP, so which is basically before and after the privatization. So if you look at the difference, right? Okay, so for incomplete restructuring, after the SIP, the performance is 5.7. Right, in the mean, and the median is 5.3. So, and then, but look at before, right? Before I had a performance 14.7, and then 13.1. So it looks like the performance has gone down after the SIP. But you have to be careful about looking at these numbers, because usually the performance before and after, it could be due to the economic situation at that period. So therefore, you cannot directly say from this table when the performance before the SIP is better than after. It doesn't mean that the performance, the privatization was bad, okay? So, you can see it's negative, right? But then what we have to really see here is compare with a complete restructuring. So even with a complete restructuring, the performance goes down, right? After the SIP, right? But what you really have to look at is the difference between these two, okay? Which means that you probably have to look at this difference, which is the difference between incomplete and complete restructuring. So which is, let's just look at the mean. For example, for incomplete restructuring, the performance went down 9%, right? For complete restructuring, the performance went down minus 3.2%. Okay, so if you compare these two numbers, 9 and 3.2, negative, complete restructuring has less, right, negative number. So therefore, you compare 9% minus and minus 3.2%. So in that case, you can say that, yes, complete restructuring had better performance. Or you can say that incomplete restructuring had worse performance. Okay? So that's how you look at this table. So this is called, you're looking at the difference, right? This is the difference, right? Before and after, right? For incomplete restructuring. Complete restructuring, you're looking at the difference, right? Before and after, right? And then you're looking, in the last column, what you're looking at the difference in difference, right? It's a difference in difference. Or you can say difference of differences, okay? So that's what we're looking at. So that's what you should be looking at, okay? Do you see this? Do you understand it? Yeah. See, this is the difference, right? For each incomplete and complete, you look at the difference before and after, right? But then, what you really have to do here is to look at the differences in the differences, okay? So, doing the same thing for return on sales, which is the next row or next panel in the middle, right? You can see that the difference, again, between before and after for incomplete restructuring is minus 9% in the mean. On the other hand, for complete restructuring is minus 4%, right? So therefore, if you compare the minus 9 and minus 4, well, complete restructuring is doing much better, okay? Which is the difference is minus 5%. And then the panel B, which is doing the same thing, comparing ROA and ROS, but here the numbers are industry-adjusted performance measures, which means that you're comparing the performance from the industry average. Okay? Because different industry could have different performance, because some industries could do well, some industry could be doing worse, right? So therefore you're comparing against the average of the industry peers. So that's how you measure the ROA and ROS, okay? Panel A is just looking at the raw measures of ROA, ROS. Panel B is looking at ROA, it's like ROA minus an industry average ROA, okay? And then basically you do the same, you compare the difference before and after. So if you look at the ROA, yes, right? The difference before and after is much smaller, right? For complete restructuring, right? In the mean, it's minus 1.8. For the incomplete restructuring, the mean is minus 7.6, right? So therefore, complete restructuring is performing better. Okay? So that's same for return on sales. It's the same result. Okay? Yeah. So this shows that, well, those firms that went through incomplete restructuring is performing worse. Okay? So that's what we find. Okay. Okay, any questions on this? Yeah, so from this table, you can learn how to read this table, and there is a name for this. It's called difference in differences. Okay? Yeah, you might have heard of this before. Okay. So this is from the different paper by Fan, Wong, and Zhang. They look at the politically connected CEOs. So when the SEO is privatized, they go through this IPO, right? And then the government can send these managers or CEOs from the government, right? So what they did was they compared the stock performance between companies that has politically connected CEO and others that do not. Okay, and this pink line is the one that has politically connected CEOs. The blue one, or the dark blue one, doesn't. Okay, although both of them, after this is okay. What they are doing is looking at the monthly returns, right? But this is called cumulative market-adjusted returns. Okay, so do you know what this is? Yeah, so what this is doing is, let's see if I can use this. Oh, good, it's working. Yeah, okay, so this is, okay, this picture is a return, right? It's a return, but what they're doing is this, okay? So from the time of the, right? So let's say this is 0, right? Yeah, so this is when there's an IPO, so this is time, right? But then there is this return, right? So let's say you have month. So there are returns, right? you can call it maybe R, 2, 3, 4. You can say these are the monthly returns, right? So monthly returns are computed from, right, this price. You can say price 0 and price 1, right? So this is, you can compute the returns, R1, right? And then you take P1 and P2, and then you can compute the R2, right? So in that way, you have this for each firm, right? And then, but the thing is, the market, right? The market means the entire market. You can call this market portfolio if you remember the cap 10. Market can also move, right? So you have Rn, 3, so it goes all the way, right? So market adjusted return is something like this. So when what people do is run a regression of monthly returns on okay. I is stock price, right? Yeah. Plus delta Rn, or in this case, you need a time, right? And then you have the time. So what you do is using the two time series of these two stock returns and the market return, you run a linear regression, you estimate these, right? Have you must have done this, right? Run a linear regression, right? So then you have the estimate of alpha and B. But when you say market adjusted, which means that where each stock has beta, right? Which means the beta is different. This is the cap, you can say it's like a cap 10 beta. So market adjusted return means that it's basically that you have this, right? Minus, usually I think it's probably like this. So this is like the market. Market adjusted. Market adjusted return, right? Because you take away the movement of the market, right? And then what this does is because it's a cumulative, right? It's cumulative market adjusted return. It's return, right? So cumulative means, let me just move this up. Now, cumulative means that, right, from IPO date, like let's say the IPO date, right? And then they're looking at 35 months, and THS, and then you are so this is a T. Yeah. So this is what they do. Yeah. So they do this for each company. You see that? Yeah. So basically, you're adding the returns cumulatively for 35 months. Okay. So this is called market adjusted cumulative returns. Okay. So sometimes it's called cumulative, sometimes it's called CAR, which is cumulative abnormal return. Abnormal means it's market adjusted. Yeah. So that's that's what it means. Okay. So that's what you see. It's cumulative, right? Yeah. I mean, when you add for 35 months, it's right here, but you do cumulative from 1, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you accumulate each for this period. When I say 35, it's right here. Yeah, this is what you see. Yeah. So you accumulate, you add up those months right from here, right? And then this is what you see. So it's like saying that if you had invested this stock, right, IPO stocks, at the IPO date, and then you held it for, let's say, 35 months, and after adjusting for the market movement, you lost minus 30%. Okay. On the other hand, for stocks that has, or companies that has politically connected CEOs, okay? But if you invested in companies that do not have politically connected CEOs, right, you lose also, but you lose only like, it's less than 10% or around 10%, minus 10% after 35 months. Okay? So this shows that, well, yes, it looks like politically connected firms perform badly or worse. Okay? Yeah. So that's one example. Okay? So this is the second example. So let's see. 5:30. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the next thing is cost of capital. Okay. Cost of capital is okay. So here, sorry, this is not this. You can say cost of capital, but this is again you're looking at various performance measures. Okay? Yeah, sorry, this is not cost of capital. The next one is cost of capital. This one is looking at a firm performance. Okay, so this is a paper that's written by Sun and Tong. Professor Sun Chen. Yeah, he's currently at Fudan University in Shanghai. And this is Wilson Tong, he's in Hong Kong, both I know very well. Okay, so by the way, I know these are good, I've known Professor Fan, Professor Wong for many years. Okay. So, okay, so this is showing that this MDR is called market to book ratio. Market is the market capitalization of the firm, and B, the book, is the book value of equity. So it's comparing the market value to the book value. So this is sometimes used as a performance measure, okay? And so it's if you go to some like a brokerage house or investment bank, people say, well, this is this measure MBR, market to book ratio, shows how many times the shares are traded above the book value. That's what they interpret. So if it's high, of course, it's a good performance. But sometimes this is used as a measure for value firm and growth firms. Okay, so growth firms, typically young firms, right, with growth potential, right. It means it has more, growth potential, but it's not reflected in the book value because it's a young firm. The book value can be small, right? But it's like in high-tech companies, right? The prices go high, they grow, right? The prices go up very high, right? So these are typically called growth firms, and value firms are the ones which have lower market-to-book ratio. So that's how this ratio is used. But again, can be used for performance. Okay? So that's what they do. So what they do is they look at other performance, a return on sales, EBITS. Okay? This is EBIT over sales. Okay, so this is a performance measure, and they run this regression, right? Explanatory variable is state-owned. ST is state-owned. It's explained here, but it's state-owned shares, so state ownership. LP is the legal person, and then the rest is for FRN is foreign ownership, and then the GDP is the growth rate of the GDP, size is the size of the firm, and lev is the leverage. So they control for this GDP size and leverage, and then see what happens to these coefficients, especially looking at this state-owned, right? So for market to book, yes, it's weak, but it does show some negative effect. So it means that if the state-owned shares, the proportion of state ownership is higher, the performance is lower, right? Although it's only statistically significant at, I think this is 10% level, okay? So it's not that strong, but at least it's negative. Then if you look at the return on sales, EBITS, EBIT over sales, yeah, they are not statistically significant, but it has a negative sign, right? Which means it implies that maybe the effect is negative on performance. Legal person, on the other hand, LP, right? It seems to have a positive effect, okay? And foreign ownership, it seems to have some positive effects as well, but not all the measures, right? So here it's a bit mixed, but state ownership seems to have slightly negative effect on performance. Okay, then the next one is doing a similar thing, but now they're looking at the performance, and this performance is called Tobin's Q, but actually how they compute Tobin's Q is exactly the same as this. NBR. It's basically market to book ratio. Okay? But some people use the name Tobin's Q because it's coming from a famous economist, Nobel Prize winning economist called James Tobin, who's no longer he's passed away a long time ago. But he is the one who came up with this economic concept of Tobin's Q, which means that his concept is basically the denominator is how much it costs if you restructure or rebuild a firm. Okay? So there's an existing firm, right? Physical existing firm, right? So how much does it cost if you rebuild a firm? Or you can say you basically purchase all the assets, physical assets, right? So that's how it costs, right, for the firm. And the numerator is the market value, which is, you can say, is the market value of the asset. Okay, so that means if the stock, for example, if the stock price values this firm, right, more than its so-called replacement value, which is the denominator, then you can say that, oh, this firm has potential in the future, right? So you can say it's like a growth potential. Right? So that's why it is used as a measure of performance, but also if the stock market says, let's say for example, the stock market says the value is more than the value of your firm if you physically bought the firm, that means the physical firm can generate more value, right? So that's why if this Q is higher, it means the performance is higher. Or you can say the growth potential is higher. Okay, so what they did was they ran regression again, but here they ran annual regression, and then finally they pooled all the data together for all these firms. Okay, so they use the total asset, foreign ownership, state ownership, and then here they have a state-owned square. It means that they're looking at this effect where if the ownership of the state increases, right, then maybe the effect can go further, increase, or it could decrease, right? So that's what they're trying to look at. So this is, okay, so if you look at these coefficients, this is a state ownership. It's negative, right? Which implies that in these numbers in the parentheses are t values, or t statistics. And if you look at the sign, it's negative, right? So which implies that the higher the state ownership, the performance seems lower. Okay? So this is more obvious compared to this previous research paper. Okay? But the point is this, right? If the state ownership becomes higher, but the result is not linear, so it's quadratic, which is this, and the coefficient is positive, right? Which means like this. Okay. Because that is a quadratic equation, right? So it means that S state ownership and state square, right, in the same regression means that, well, and the coefficient is negative on the state and positive on the squared term. So which means that if you draw a picture, it looks something like this. Okay. But then there is some point where there is a minimum, which means that this is when, right, state shares, let's say, is very small, state ownership is very small, the performance is, let's say, here, right? But if the state ownership increases, the performance goes down, okay? But after some point, it turns around, right? The performance increases. So which means that when the ownership is small, but when it increases, then there might be some negative effect of government ownership, right? So it could be like grabbing hand. But the thing is, after the ownership becomes very high, then there might be some benefits of having a large ownership because the government can actually help, right, the business. So that's why they have found out that the effect of government ownership is not like just one direction, right? Yeah, so that's what this result means. So by looking at these results, right? So first we look at, well, this Dengan and her result, where this shows that, well, it depends on how you restructure or you privatize the firm. So they are looking into more details of how SOEs are privatized. And this is I think it's a very interesting paper. And this second result, Fan, Wong, and Zhang, basically shows that, well, look at the stock performance. It looks like if the company has politically connected CEOs, the performance seems to be worse, okay? And this one shows, well, state ownership looks like that seems to have negative effects on performance, but it's not very strong. And then this paper by Wei, Xie, and Zhang also shows that, well, it could be negative if you just look at the state ownership. But the thing is, the effect might, turn around, right? So it could be on the extreme side, either ownership is small or very large, the performance is better. Okay? So that's what they find. Yeah, so so what's wrong with government control? Well, in general, I think in general, you can say that the state ownership is associated with lower accounting performance and also lower stock market performance. But also, it's just generally, but there are exceptions, as we saw. Yeah. So then the next question is why this can be the case, right? So why this can be the case? So, so SOE may hire more workers, right? Which might be good for employment, but this is because for social objective, you hire more workers, but that may not be good for the shareholders, right, or the performance. But the thing is, that may not be the only reason, right? So this is what Dengan shows. Okay. So this is called, what they look at is related party transactions, okay? Related party transactions, which means that it's a transaction between like the parent firm, right? It's like a business transaction or asset sales between the parent firm and the listed firm or some other related parties, okay? So in China, this related party transaction is available on the financial statement. So people have used this data to look at these issues. So look at this, right? If you look at incomplete restructuring and complete restructuring, again we are comparing both, right? Let's look at this transfer pricing of goods and service. Sales of final products to related parties. Purchase of raw materials from related parties. Rental payment to related parties. Okay? So if you look at the percentage, incomplete restructuring has much higher percentage, right, compared to the complete restructuring for all these items, right? So it means that the business practice is done perhaps within these parent and the listed firm, right, or maybe other related parties, okay? So, so that's one fact that we find, okay? And so this is day-to-day, or it's a business, right? It's basically sales and purchases, also rental payments, right? So like rental payments, right? Like, for example, like rental payments, maybe the listed company might be renting from the parent company, right? In that case, the parent company might be charging, could be, charging higher fee, right? Or it could be lower, but it's not clear. But actually, they are having some business transaction. Right? They could be having this business transaction if it's incomplete restructuring. Yeah. So if you going back and look at this picture, right, of incomplete and complete, right, like this one, right. So there is this parent company above the listed company. So it's not surprising if they have these two parent and the subsidiary, which is listed, had some business transactions, right? So these business transactions could be more, right, for incomplete restructuring compared to this complete restructuring. Okay, so that's one. Let's go back. Yeah, so these are business transactions, but asset sales, assets purchased from related parties, again, yeah, it's much higher when the privatized firm has gone through incomplete restructuring, right? Yeah. So, and trade credit again is, when you buy things from some other party, you don't pay immediately, right? Or if you sell things, if you sell things, you don't necessarily receive the payment immediately. If you pay, also you don't pay immediately, right? So therefore, that's a trade credit. It's like it's basically payables and accounts payable and accounts receivables. Okay, so if you can see that in the incomplete restructuring, this is much higher, right? So it means that they may not be paying immediately, right? Because these are related transactions. So they may not be paying to the parent immediately. So it could be either way, right? It could be the parent is not paying the listed company immediately, okay? So that's this paper sort of suggests that there must be something going on, right? In the way they do business, okay? So we don't know exactly how much price they pay, right? We don't know that from this paper, but that's sort of a suggestion. If the performance is bad for these firms that can completely restructure, right, it means that they must be paying the wrong price. Right? They could be paying a higher price for what they buy, or maybe selling things at a lower price to related parties. Okay? Yeah, so that's basically what we find. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so the conclusion, what they say is the root cause of weak performance for incomplete restructured SOE could, basically expropriate. It could be the expropriation by large shareholders, right? Remember that large shareholders were like chairman or CEO, right? They had large concentration of shares, right? So that could, in that case, because there's large concentration of shares, then the minority shareholders, other shareholders could be expropriated because they could be doing business for themselves. Right? It means the large shareholders could be doing business for themselves, or maybe for the parent company. Yeah. Yeah, so therefore, with weak property rights protection, the parent company had both the incentive and ability to expropriate resources from the listed companies. So that's what they are suggesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is like a question. Okay, so yeah, this is a fine question. So do management goals of partially privatized Chinese enterprise differ from a fully privatized firm? Yeah, why? Well, this is a very general question because, as we said, SOEs, partially privatized SOEs, which are partially owned by the government, can have their own objectives, right? Could be political, could be social. Yeah. And then how do they control privatized firms? Well, we saw, right, they can send in people, they can have a majority shareholder, or they can also have business transactions. Yeah. And then what is the impact of state control on Chinese firms? So we saw a couple of results, right, empirical results. Yeah, so this is like a summary question. Okay, so yeah, that's it. So any questions? Okay, good. So next week is a break, right? Yeah, so we'll come back after 2 weeks. Yeah, and then we'll continue with the state capitalism. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah, I will send you the feedback of the roadmap, but I will send in a sort of a summary through the WhatsApp. Okay. Yeah. I probably won't send you. I have sent some individual feedback, but I will sort of summarize and send a summary. Okay, thank you.